I think it's obvious to anybody who is thinking about being. Being requires knowing, and knowing at a level other than intellectual knowing, a knowing that's deeper, a knowing that is embodied. Um, Embodied spirituality is, a disembodied spirituality is not really very effective. An embodied spirituality where we feel it. In the New Testament, the word know is used a lot, and it is often translated and talked about in terms of information. You got to know these facts. You got to know this scripture, memorize the scripture, details, know this theology, repeat the theology back. But the Greek word there actually means a deep body knowing, an experiential form of knowing, to know it at an experiential level, which is the only way we ever really know anything. We can have information, but to know something is a more of an embodied experience. So what I want to do is I want to walk through some context for focusing, and then I'll shift and I'll introduce you to 5 basic steps that are elementary to getting into focusing. So as a premise, let me give you a statement of what I believe is a truth that some people like and some people really don't like to hear. But here's the truth, I believe. And that is that external circumstances don't create our reactions, but they reveal what's in us to react. Now, the reason people don't like it so much is because we like to blame other people for our reactions. You made me so mad. You made me so upset. You made me so sad. I do believe that when we can be aware of those reactions, and we can take some steps to be present with those reactions in a self-compassionate and humble way, it can be a path toward healing the heart wounds that are behind that. As I said, I did a doctorate of ministry in the area of spiritual formation, and my focus was on internalized shame. And if I did it today, I would also refer to it as internalized trauma. And we have all experienced trauma. I have a friend who has this line. He says, no one comes out of childhood without exit wounds. We all have trauma from some level. And part of the dilemma of getting present with being is that our trauma and the defenses created out of that trauma can continue to sabotage us. They can hijack us. We can have negative reactions to people. They remind us of somebody. Situations remind us of the past. And so we have negative reactions and we react externally to them. Sometimes it's react externally negatively to the people closest to us. I've never seen reactions enhance a relationship. The other side is we can have negative reactions that are not external. We can have negative reactions that are internal. We can react negatively to our own felt sense. I'm feeling sad. I shouldn't feel sad, so I won't feel sad. And sometimes it's referred to as bypassing. And I don't know if one of your books refers to spiritual bypassing, where we use our spirituality to shut down our emotions and shut down our experience of being real. So we can go either way. And so our bodies have great wisdom for us. We get our educational system, unfortunately, and our context emphasizes knowing intellectually, cognitively, memorizing, and that's all important. But we often lose track of the intuitive body knowledge that we really have, we've had access to. At even the earliest ages, we've had the privilege of having a little child in our house periodically, a couple times a week over the last few months. And to watch him developmentally has been fascinating. Sometimes I watched him learning how to turn over. Intuitively, he knew it was important to turn over. And I watched him, he couldn't do it. I watched him one week and he had his arms out sideways. Well, you can't turn over when both arms are out sideways. The next week he came, he had one arm tucked and he turned over. Nobody taught him how to do that. It was an intuitive, innate, felt sense within him. This is the next best thing for me. This is the next developmental piece. Now he's beginning to walk. Nobody's teaching him that. We're helping him structure it, but it's an internal knowing. And we get cut off from that. And yet we have glimpses of it. For example, have you ever had a time where you felt you were being watched? Somebody was watching you, and you turn around and you see somebody staring at you? Or maybe you've been caught staring at somebody and they turn around and see you staring at them. How did they know that? How did you know that? It just felt odd, like the hair on the back of my neck, somebody's watching me. It was a piece of knowing. Or another example, I'm sure all of us have left home at some point, and as we get out in the car driving away, we think there's something I forgot to do. And we go through this list. Did I turn off the stove? Did I turn off the lights? Did I lock the front door? Did I leave the No, none of that works. And then you think of what it is, and it's like, aha, yes, that's exactly what it was. How did you know it wasn't the first few things? Your body told you it wasn't. How did you know it was the thing you thought of? Your body said, yep, that's exactly it. You registered in your body. We often have experiences where our body leads us into talking differently. Sometimes we'll be talking to somebody, we'll say, well, here's how I feel. We use a word. And then we think about it, well, that's not quite right. That doesn't quite feel right. Let me try another word. And we try another word. Our body has a vocabulary. Who knew that our body, we're walking around with dictionaries inside our body? We get entitled with these emotions. Our emotions come up, we get sabotaged, we react. I want to suggest that our emotions are neither good or bad. Not one emotion we have is really a good emotion or a bad emotion. There's no neurological channel for good emotions and neurological channel for bad emotions. They are emotions, and the stories we attach to them, or the stories that are attached to them out of trauma, are what label them as good or bad. And they can be very pleasant or very scary. But all of our emotions are attempts to communicate with us. Our body wants to communicate for us. All of the feelings we have are for us if we're willing to pay attention to it and honor our body's communication to us. When our feelings take over, we get lost in the process. We use language that we get lost. For example, typically we talk about, I feel, Mike, I feel frustrated by this inability to be here, to be a minister. Or I feel angry, or I feel sad, or I feel hurt. The language we use is really important because it's a metaphor and maybe a word picture of what we're experiencing. When I say I am angry or I am sad, I'm saying that is me. It has taken me over, and I am lost within it. And I begin to react out of that feeling. I am sad. I am hurt. I am angry. Or I am numb, or I'm frozen, or I don't care. All those. The very language says I'm over-identified with that feeling. I don't have the feeling, it has me. I use the metaphor or image of a car, and if I'm angry and I'm angry, I have put anger in the driver's seat of the car, and I'm in the back seat. And the anger is driving the car. And when it wrecks, relationally or however, it goes away, and I have to clean up the mess that the anger made. But I become reactive. I'm not really responding, I'm reacting to it. So the very language we have sets us up to be in a pseudo experience of being. I am angry is not really my being. It's a false sense of being. but it takes me over, and it becomes my story and my reality, and I lose a sense of really who I really am. And so we'll talk about how focusing can shift that and bring us back to a sense of real being, along with the parts that are upset and angry. I just used the word parts, and I will use that term a little later in the other explanation. First of all, since there's counselors on here, I want to identify. I'm not talking about being schizophrenic. I'm not talking about having multiple personalities, but I am talking about the way we do language experiences, awarenesses within us using the word parts. I've had a conversation like this numerous times, maybe you have too, where I will have some kind of challenge, something I've got to deal with, and I'll say, well, part of me thinks the answer is this. This is how to deal with this. And then a little later, well, part of me thinks that's really a wrong way to do that. That's not going to work at all. And then part of me says, well, you could ask somebody to help you, but then they would know you didn't know what you're talking about. And then another part of me says, let's get a piece of pie or check Facebook or check my email, take a walk. And all those parts are there. But as the parts are there and we're not there with them, then they take over. Any one of them can take over. And often it's the pie or the ice cream or the checking Facebook, which means I'm out of being. I'm reacting out of my anger, my fear, my whatever feeling is coming up, rather than a response. So I'll use the language of parts as a way to identify parts that we develop as defenses out of the trauma that we've experienced in the past. Whenever we've experienced trauma in the past, if it has not been resolved at the time, we have a wounded part of us that we develop defenses against being hurt again. We're triggered by other people, what they say, what they do, situations, and those parts defend us in that wounded part of us. Not only do they defend that little wounded part of us from other people, unfortunately, it also defends that wounded part from us, because sometimes we are the most critical about ourselves. We are the most judgmental about ourselves. So these parts are for us, but they're protecting the wounded parts of us. I didn't say this last time, but I'll put it here because I talked about trauma. My experience is that when we experience trauma at a young age, and that in some area of life, we may grow up in the rest of our life. But often when we're triggered in adult life, we often go back to the same coping skill we had at the time of the trauma. I'm sure you've been in situations with neighbors or church meetings or work settings where you're around people who are normally easygoing people, and all of a sudden something happens and suddenly they're throwing a temper tantrum like they're a 5-year-old. That probably represents the fact that something triggered a remembrance of a trauma, and they're using the same coping skill they had at the time of the trauma. So the wounded little one is still there to deal with. And that robs us of being. That robs us of being. The trauma robs us, and the unresolved piece robs us. So let me talk to you about the context for transformation. I told the other group, I had an opportunity to work in a psych hospital for a while. It's always good in a psych hospital when you're carrying keys. That's always a good sign. And I would visit people. I was doing pastoral care. And after 2 or 3 days, I'd visit with them and we'd talk. And they would often say something like this: will you help me put my life back together again? And I probably never said it a lot, but I always thought it. And that is, no, I will not. Because if you put your life back together again exactly the way it was, you're going to be back right here. That's just reformation. I want to be about transformation. Transformation is a deeper healing process. As I ran into focusing as a deeper healing process, It was discovered by a man named Eugene Gendlin. And what he learned was that real transformation happens at a process level, not at an information level. Real transformation happens at a processing level, not simply at an information level. And I want to read a quote of his that captures the essence of what focusing is about and being is about, the healing journey of being. I'll read it a couple of times and then we'll move on to the steps. So here's Gendlin's. What is split off, that is what we repress, what is split off, not felt, remains the same when it was felt. But when it is felt now, it changes. Most people don't know this. They think that by not permitting the feeling of this negative ways, that they make themselves good. On the contrary, that keeps these negatives static, the same from year to year to year. I didn't know that. I mean, I kind of intuitively knew that, but that certainly was not how I was taught to help people change. It was much more in the church world about right doctrine, right belief, right information. But that's informational, that's reformational, not necessarily transformational. So let me talk to you about 5 core practices that lead us into beginning to doing focusing. And the first step is the opposite of what we typically say. I typically say, I am angry, or I'm upset, or I'm hurt. And the first step is to shift the language we use. Language makes a lot of difference. So it'd be a shift to something in me feels angry. I feel angry. Something in me feels angry. So it's not a denial. It doesn't repress it, but it begins to distance it from me. It begins to make it smaller than me. If it's bigger than me, or if it overwhelms me, then it's going to drive my bus and it's going to wreck. I'm going to react rather than respond. To simply say something in me feels blank, whatever, it is a shift of perspective. Perspective makes all the difference. It's a learning to have a pause between stimulus and response. If there's no pause between stimulus and response, we just respond like Pavlov's dog. And we've all done that, react. If we can pause in the middle, we can begin to gain perspective and we can think out loud. I mentioned little Ryland Hill over here. He's been teaching me something. He introduced me to the philosopher Daniel Tiger. Ever hear Daniel Tiger? The line is, when you're so mad that you want to roar, take a deep breath and count to 4. What great wisdom. 1, 2, 3, 4. Right there, Angela. Right, exactly. Yeah. When I can pause and I can step back and say, okay, something in me feels upset. Something in me feels angry. I'm not discounting it. I'm creating a gap where I can begin to have some perspective in space. Otherwise, I lose my being, my potential for being. Step number 2, acknowledge that part. In fact, 9 times out of 10, I suggest say hello to it. Now, that seems strange to say hello to something that's negative. However, I suspect most of us have had that negative feeling several times before. So it isn't like it's a stranger. But just saying, something in me feels really angry right now. And I'm going to say hello to that. So it's a part of me. It's not all of me. And by saying hello, I'm not saying I like it. I'm not saying I even appreciate it. I'm giving it the respect to be that. I'm actually respecting my body. My body is for me. All of our feelings are for us. the stories you put on them don't always allow that to be realized. For example, I often ask people if they've ever had a inner critic, and I've never had anybody say no. I told the other group, I have a friend who calls it her shitty committee that shows up. And someone's like, can identify with that. Well, as long as we identify it as a critic, we're going to get rid of it. We feel like tact. What if, in fact, it is something that is in us that is worried for us? Worried that sometimes that we will make a foolish decision because we made it in the past. Or sometimes even worried that we will start something and not finish it. That's not a bad thing. It doesn't have to be truthful. It doesn't have to be accurate. But to allow it to be there and to say, okay, third step, to pause. I've said hello to it, and to pause with curiosity about how to be present with it. What might it want me to be, how to be present with it? Like you'd be present with a wounded child on your lap. You got a child that's scared. You got a part of you that's reacting, angry. If a little child's angry, you put them on your lap. You don't beat them up for being angry. You sit with them and you be kind to them and you, how can I help you? What's going on? To pause, to keep it company, to be curious about it. Sometimes it is actually helpful if you can identify the part of your body where it shows up, often in the middle part of our body, our heart, a chest, a throat, is to actually put your hand there. Just a little putting your hand there. Sometimes the parts that show up just want to be heard, just acknowledged. Something in me is feeling really hurt right now. And I acknowledge that it's hurt. And I'm curious about how I want to be with it and how it wants me to be with it. Now, I will say this. Sometimes our wounded parts are scared of us. And so they're like a wounded little animal that will pick its nose out, but is not sure it's to trust you. And sometimes you have to have patience with that part before it is really willing to be honest with us and tell us what it's about, what's going on. But be pausing and curious about it. So something in me, I acknowledge it, I pause with it. So now I'm going to loop back to the first part. And beginning the sentence would be something like this. I am sensing something in me feels. So that something in me feels, but now I am sensing it. When I am sensing it, that differentiates me from it. It's smaller than I am. And I can be with it because I'm larger than it. I can be curious. I don't have to be overcome by it, overwhelmed by it. I can be present with it. I can respect it. I can respect my body trying to communicate with me. And so I am, the term I use, when I am sensing, I am self in presence. I am myself and I'm present. It's there. I honor it. I listen to it, but I'm not overwhelmed by it. So I have it. It doesn't have me. Otherwise, it's going to have me. And then I react. So the fifth step, something I am sensing, something in me feels angry, hurt. I'm saying hello to it. I'm sitting with it patiently and curious and wondering what's going on, sensing what's happening. And at some point, it may occur to me to say, well, no wonder I feel that way. I mean, after all, no wonder. Part of my story is that my mother was 40, my father was 50 when I was born. I had a 17-year-old sister who became my surrogate mother. And at 7 years old, she died. And I was really left alone. I had brothers and sisters, but they were all gone by the time I was born, really. And so I remember at a very young age, probably 7 years old, saying to myself, this older couple that I'm with, they don't really know how to make life work. They probably have third, fourth grade education. And if I'm going to make life work, I got to do it on my own. It's all up to me. And that was trauma and my response to trauma. And I could go look back at my child and say, well, that was stupid. That was horrible. That was a terrible thing to say to yourself. But no, it was a smart thing to say because it made sense. And now in my adult life, when I have difficulty connecting with my wife and I'm sensing something coming up like, I can, okay, well, no wonder it's a struggle. When we can be self-compassionately present with our wounded parts and have humility. After all, I was 7 years old. What does a 7-year-old know? When I can have self-compassion with humility with these parts, they will communicate to me what they're worried about, what they're concerned about, what they want for me, and will lead me back to that wounded child and that wounded part, to be present with it, to have the adequate resources to heal and move forward. Because the wounded parts will keep us from the full being. It'll be in the way of our being. Mm-hmm. So I'll give you one more quote from Jenlin, and I'll read it. The bad feeling in the body, or the bad feeling is the body, knowing and pushing toward what good will be. Every bad feeling is potential energy toward a more right way of being if we give it space to move forward toward rightness. Being present. It's the path. So again, Carl will give you a sheet. It'll have some of these 5 things on it. It'll have some of that verbiage, and then it has a link to an online class I have called Growing Bigger Than What's Provoking You. It's a free class. It has videos on all these 5 parts, and it has a video of a lady who's gone through it, and her reflections on going through it. Has a printout copy you can print off. And at the end of that, I offer you a free 1-hour focusing session as you care to do that.